It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I just hate that it's following up to such a somber event from 15 years ago. I can tell you, I got choked up a little bit in the first service watching that video, and I'll try my best to hold my composure, but it does. It has a profound effect on each and every one of us. You know, September 11th, 2001 forever changed the way of life in America. It affects how we travel. I know I made a joke a little bit about TSA earlier, go to any airport. I'm sorry if I offended anybody. They take a bad rap, but they do a vital job, I'm going to tell you. They're there to prevent that from happening again. You know, it changed how we live. It's changed political thought, policy, emergency response. 15 years has changed as far as preparedness and everything. It's not just the hurricane. It's preparing for what if we have another 9/11 or some type of tragic event. And we've learned a lot of lessons. And I'm going to tell you, in 23 and a half years of law enforcement, we still don't know it all, because we learn every time something happens, and it makes us better for the future. It's also affected the vision and future we have for America. Today, as we remember all the lives of the firefighters, law enforcement officers, paramedics, military members, and civilians who died in that tragic event, and as we recall those visions that we just watched of the towers being crashed into, people jumping from windows, and ultimately the towers collapsed, it can't help but elicit a flood of emotions. And I'm going to tell you, I'm sure just as I felt the hurt and the pain that was thrust upon our country during that day. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. God has a plan for each and every one of us. So, great testimony. Thank you. I can tell you, I remember that day vividly. You know, I received a call shortly before 9 o'clock. First tower had already been crashed into. My sergeant at the time was Brad Leonard. I answered the phone. Yes, Sarge. He said, we're under attack. Get your uniform on. Get back to work. Now, you need to understand, I've only been home for 2 hours that morning, because I had worked a 10-hour shift the night before. We had a special assignment. And I said, well, what do you know, of course, I had just got good to sleep. I woke up, and I said, well, what do you mean? He said, turn your TV on. So I turned the television on, and just within a couple minutes of turning the TV on, I watched the second plane crash into the South Tower. And I realized the world had changed. At that moment, my adrenaline quickened, and I started putting my uniform back on. I got ready to go to work, called my wife going out the door to tell her what was going on. I said, I'll call you when I can, but I don't know when it'll be. I went to work not knowing what to expect, what other plans somebody may have had. All I knew is I had to go to work. Myself and all the members of my department and every department in this county and nationwide went on the same alert. For the next 3 days, we spent what we call rotating 12-hour shifts in Alpha Bravo. We split the forces of the department. Half works one 12-hour shift, half works the other. And we did that, and we stood at the airport, and we checked every car that went into the airport. We patrolled every place that could be a potential target, not knowing, responding to suspicious persons calls because there was panic in our community as well as every community across this nation. Yes, the Fourth Amendment went out the window at the airport. There was no worry about search and seizure. If you were going to get on a plane, your car was getting searched. Most people understood. We had a few that complained and said they were going to sue us, but we said, well, okay, get in line. But, you know, we're under attack. You don't understand. This is a different ball game at this point in time. So after we got there and, you know, the days ahead and the hours that elapsed and we saw the other events as I was coming to work and the Pentagon getting crashed into, the other plane that crashed in the field, and not knowing for 3 days until we realized we were at a point that we felt like there was no immediate threat to this area. And I can't say we went back to normal, we just went back to normal operating hours at that point in time. But since then, we've had to be vigilant, be reminded about these events, that this could happen anywhere, at any time, any given hour. And that's a reality of our professions. I mentioned in the first service, I wore this shirt specifically today, and I thanked Rudy immensely for telling me I didn't have to wear a tie and a jacket. So he said it's a relaxed environment, we're a beach church. I said, great. But I wore it because of the red, white, and blue. Not only does it represent the colors of our flag of this great nation, but it also represents every discipline in the first responder field. Red is for fire, blue is for law enforcement, and white is for EMS. And it's very symbolic to do that, and as we remember those that gave their lives on that tragic day. One of the things that followed, there was an increase of camaraderie both among the people who served, but Americans as a whole began to unite in America. They were united around that collective response. We will never forget, and we shouldn't. History teaches us very important lessons. The nation as a whole united, and a Gallup poll showed that in the days to follow, 90% of Americans approved of President Bush's performance in response to 9/11. What was also unique, it also showed that 89% of the Democrats approved of his response. Party lines and politics were set aside at that moment. Okay? You see, when tragedy strikes, something profound happens in America. It has a profound effect on its people. It's then that we are at our strongest. It's then that our resolve is solid and we determine to persevere and make it through. That's what makes our nation so great. Immediately following the attack, church attendance rose, yet within a few short months, it returned to normal. On the other hand, patriotism, volunteerism, and both recruitment for the military and first responder professions increased for several years. I know that for a fact because I served as the sergeant who did training and recruiting for the police department from 2004 to 2006. There was not a lack of applications of people wanting to do the job, to give back to their community and serve and make a difference. And we've had plenty of qualified applicants at that time. We could readily find and hire qualified people, and we would also constantly hear as we ate our meals, citizens would walk up, "Thank you for your service." Like I said, we had united. It was that resolve and the support and mechanisms that were there. But just as times of old in history, as time passes from tragedy, we socially, as a society, gradually move away from that commitment and resolve, and we start to get into a place of complacency and apathy. And that's dangerous because we could be caught unaware again when we get to that point. And at that point, I'd just like to take a moment just for us to remember, just a moment of silence to remember those lives that lost, because we're going to transition here because they've asked me to talk a little bit too about where are we at 15 years later. So if you would just join me in a moment of silence. So where are we at some 15 years after this tragic event? Today, it's no secret. We see a national debt in excess of $19 trillion. One time in my actual life, I actually saw we had a balanced budget. It's been a number of years ago. We had $3.4 trillion of consumer debt. We have high rates of unemployment. Our country is being divided. Our country is being divided by politics. It's being divided by religious debate. It's being divided by immigration debate, governmental budget restraints, cuts in services, and as of recent, a rising national rhetoric in which law enforcement is under extreme scrutiny and blame. We're on the brink of another tragedy, except the tragedy is not from the outside. The tragedy is from inside our own country. And we need to start paying attention to the things that are going on around us, because the world changed that day, and it's going to change again, and we're going to be caught unaware if we don't start looking at some of these issues. So one of the social concerns I see as the chief is a rising rate of abuse for opioids. Opioids are heroin, morphine, fentanyl, OxyContin. Some of these are legally prescribed, some of these are illegal substances, and they're readily abused. Matter of fact, the rate today is 4 times greater than it was a decade ago. What that means for us in law enforcement is we're seeing families impacted because we're seeing a lot of overdoses. You know, this isn't the heroin that we see on the streets today that are starting to show up from the 60s or even the 80s when we had a growth in it. This heroin has the same potency that used to be used in 1/10 of a gram. That 1/10 of a gram now is 10/10 of a grams in potency. What's causing overdoses and deaths? Same thing with the fentanyl and so forth. And it's impacting a lot of families through tragedy and loss of life. The other thing that we've seen over the last several years, both nationally and locally, is an increase in gun-related violence. Just 2 years ago, we had a stint of homicides in Panama City. Those homicides specifically were young black men shooting other young black men in conflict with each other. That's how they resolved their problem. Whatever the basis of the conflict, that was what was going on. And I can tell you, Sheriff McKeithen and I almost talk daily. And in our collective years of experience, we had never seen anything like that, just back to back. Well, that's just a glimmer of what we saw here. That was not the norm. That scared the daylights out of he and I both because, like I said, we had not dealt with it. Families were devastated by those incidents, both the families of the victims, but also the families of the perpetrators. So there's some parallels, just like we saw there. It affected more than just that, but it affected us as a community too. It created some panic. It created some worry. Even though these were focused incidences, it still creates that issue for all of us. It affects us all. But what I saw during that time was something I hadn't seen also in my 23 years. A community came together, both law enforcement, business owners, clergy, and other citizens in the wake of that tragedy, with a focus to say, what do we need to do different so that that doesn't happen again? How do we change the culture? And make no doubt, it's a cultural issue today with this gun violence. It's higher among teens, adolescents, and young adults than it ever has been. It's growing. And I say it's different because 31 years ago when I was in high school, we could carry guns to school. I did every day, depending on what hunting season it was, whether I had a shotgun or a rifle in my car. As long as it's in the trunk or in a gun rack in your truck and it was unloaded, now we had bullets or shotgun shells, we could legally carry them on school campuses. I can't think of a person when I went to high school didn't either have a Schrader or a buck knife on their belt, 3.5-inch blade. We never shot anybody. We never stabbed anybody. We might have a fist fight every now and then. We were smart enough to go off school campus because back then, as long as it didn't happen on school grounds, you wouldn't get suspended. But at the end of that fist fight, whatever disagreement we had, it was over. We were friends again. That is not the world we live in today. It's all about revenge and one-upping. It's all about taking it to that next level. And that's a cultural issue across the board. And we've got to really focus and get a handle on that because that's going to continue to be a tragedy in the years ahead. Nationally, we're seeing unprecedented gun violence in many of our nation's largest cities. As of yesterday in Chicago, they've had 2,969 shootings. That's not shots fired, that's people shot. They've had over 500 homicides this year in that stealing. They've already surpassed last year, and they're only 9 months in, just starting the 9th month of the year. They had 13 people killed on Labor Day weekend alone. The third largest American city, Chicago, eclipses both Los Angeles and New York combined. That's a huge cultural issue, folks. We saw a glimmer of that 2 years ago in our city. We don't want to see the epidemic they've got here. On July 8, 2016, we watched as news flashed where 5 officers in Dallas were gunned down and ambushed. That's the other concern that we have. Yes, what we saw on the screen can happen any day at any given hour, and we have to be vigilant to watch for that. But that lone wolf attack from inside the country is the greatest threat we have right now. 5 officers were slain, but there was something unique and amazing about that event. What were those officers doing? Their duty. But what were they performing their duties for that day? Okay, and there was a group there that were utilizing their First Amendment right to protest shootings in 2 other cities. Those officers, without hindrance or without any expectation, were there to protect them from anybody doing them harm so that they could exercise their constitutional rights. And they were specifically targeted and gunned down. It's the greatest law enforcement loss and tragedy since 9/11. I got a call from one of the local media persons, and they asked me, said, Chief, since this incident in Dallas, what are you going to do different? I said, it's business as usual for us. Well, what do you mean? I said, that's a reality for us every day. Has been for some time. This year alone, we've had 26 officers killed in the United States by gunfire. 11 of those have been by ambush. They were specifically sought and targeted for being law enforcement officers. So almost 42% have been specifically targeted and killed. There's an attack on our profession. There's an attack on the safety of our communities because there are people out there specifically doing that. And that's what I'm saying. The danger is within right now. Also, there's a rising demand for police accountability through the use of body-worn cameras, demand for federal oversight, policy directives from the White House, and increased social media presence. All of these things present new challenges for us as a law enforcement agency. 34 states enacted body-worn camera legislation, Florida being one of them. Now, when they did this, we had concerns as law enforcement executives. But our concern was not that it was going to catch our officers doing something wrong. That's the least of our concern, because the reality is we've had cameras in our cars for years. Our concern actually was for the rights of the citizens. Because, see, when they first wanted this and started legislating and demanding it, the first thing the Florida Police Chief Association said, wait a minute, you've got to have public records law to address this. And if without that exemption or there's being something, I come to your house as a police officer at 2 o'clock in the morning and you and your spouse are at your best because y'all have had a disagreement and you're in your night clothes and I've got a body camera on and I'm videoing this encounter, if there's no exemption that we can't, say that we can't provide that document to you or that video to you, any citizen can walk in and request it and get it. Well, that's your privacy. That's your personal life. That's your business. That was one of our top concerns going in. Because if we didn't have that in place, your neighbor would be able to get a copy of that. And of course, where's it going to be? YouTube. And how quick will that take? Seconds. All right? And your business is all out there. But there's other concerns with privacy and then constitutional rights and all these things that have to be observed. There were a lot of questions that hadn't been answered. The other question was, okay, where's the money going to come from? I don't know if you realize it, but Panama City Police Department is the 3rd largest municipal police department in the 18 counties of the Panhandle. The only 2 municipal police agencies bigger than us by a sworn complement of size is Pensacola and Tallahassee. There are 6 other sheriff's offices in that 18 counties that are larger than us. We're the 9th largest agency overall. We're a fairly good-sized agency, and we are at full service. We see a little bit of everything, I can tell you. But for us to buy body-worn cameras for our 100-plus with the reserves sworn officers, and to buy the backbone, which is the hardware, software, to manage those thousands of hours of video, and the additional staff I would have to hire as a chief to manage that system, to redact or download video for public records requests would probably cost $300,000 to $400,000 for our agency. Well, we all know that the budget climate's not been great for governments over the last several years since the economic downturn. What that means is that money has to come from somewhere. Either I've got to cut resources. Well, I can't afford to cut any more police officers. I'm still 7 positions unfunded from 2007. So it's got to come from somewhere. Well, everybody's favorite word is, or that they don't want to hear, is taxes. That's what funds the police department, is your ad valorem tax and those merchant license fees. That's what we use those tax dollars to pay for the services that are provided. And a lot of people don't realize that. So it impacts. Of course, politicians don't like it either because they don't want to raise taxes because that gets voters upset. And I get it. Social media itself is a two-edged sword. I know Nisa was here earlier. You know, we talk about a love-hate relationship. We really respect each other. Unfortunately, our jobs sometimes conflict. And I'm going to give you a byline. If you saw something that popped up on a social media page that said, "Officer caught on video," ... What's your first thought? Done something wrong. Okay? And of course, what does it draw you to do? Click on it to watch it, right? Well, that's part of that whole promotion and marketing. They want to get the likes and the clicks and people clicking on it, and then, of course, then all those little ads pop up and everything that go along with it. It's part of the promotion. But what happens when you click it and it says, "Officer caught on video rescuing woman and kids from burning car"? But the first thought goes instantly to, they've done something wrong. Now, there are times you're going to find that. We're not perfect. We're human, just like everybody else. We don't always get it right. We try to do the best we do. We have rules and guidelines and training and so much things to try to do it right as often as we can, but we're not perfect as a profession. And we deal with those issues and we learn from them. We figure out how can we prevent that from happening again. And that's what we work on. You know, another byline can be officer involved in fatal shooting put on administrative leave. Again, it implies that the officer's done something wrong. The reality is, by policy, I have to put that officer on paid administrative leave because they've just gone through a critical incident. I've been through some critical incidents. I've not had to fatally shoot somebody. I've come close to a couple of times in my career. But the stress and everything that happens in those split seconds can have a profound effect shortly after to years after. The reason we put officers on paid administrative leave is because they need to be evaluated by a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist. We have them evaluated to see if they are in need of services because they've just gone through a critical stress incident. And we want to make sure they get those services if they need it. The other thing is, as a chief, I can't put that officer in good conscience back on the road if they're not ready to go back to work and they're not emotionally and physically able to do that. They have to be evaluated. The other thing is somebody's going to have to do that investigation. It's not going to be us. We call Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They come in and they do that investigation. And we have to do an internal separate from that. I can't comment by statute on their active investigation. I can't comment because of Police Officer Bill of Rights on the internal stuff we have to do until it's over. Those are laws. If I violate it, it's a crime. That's not known to the public a lot of times. So when you see those bylines, there's actually a reason. We're giving them the information we can give them, the media, so they can do their job, but we're very limited. We're restricted as to what we can do. As far as oversights for agency, what the general public may not be aware, especially after watching the national media for the last couple of years, is the portrayal of law enforcement that we're widely out there just using force all the time, and that we're using deadly force, and all these police shootings are happening and all of that. But that's the general perception, that that's normal business. I can't speak to the 18,000 agencies in the nation, and there are 18,000 local police agencies, municipal and sheriff's offices in this country. Half of them have officer or departments 25 or fewer. But I can talk about what we do here. Panama City has a resident population of about 37,000 residents. We police 80 to 120,000 people a day. It's not just the people that live in Panama City. It's the people coming through, coming into, going to the 2 universities, the hospitals, the port, all the other jobs and stuff available. Just alone, the average daily traffic count's over 80,000 vehicles on 77, 98, 23rd. One person per car, that's over 80,000 people alone just driving through our city. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's doing something wrong, but that's the population we actually police. In 2015, we had 53,497 contacts with the public. That's from calls for service, and that could be everything from the barking dog to shots fired. That could be from traffic stops, it could be seeing somebody stranded, or sick, or it could be just somebody suspicious and we think they might be committing a crime. But out of that, we only arrested 5,269 people. Just under 10% of our contacts even resulted in an arrest. But who thinks they know the number of use of force that we had that year? Anyone want to wager a guess? What was it? 2%? No, way less. All of our uses of forces put together for all of my police officers collectively for that year, and that's everything from a radial strike to a pepper spray to if they hit them with a baton, if they tase them, whatever, or if they discharge their firearm. We had 56 uses of force. That's it. Okay? Well, if you look at the amount of contacts, so we had one use of force for every 1,000 contacts, roughly. Out of the arrest, 1 out of every 100 arrests resulted in some type of use of force. But it could be drilled down even further. We did have a deadly force incident last year. We had an officer-involved shooting. Actually, we had 3 deadly force uses, but they were the same incident. It was the young guy that was on Beck Avenue with the shotgun firing rounds. That was a tragedy. Our officers didn't come to work today expecting to be involved in a firefight, but it happened. It was a tragedy not only for the officers because of the impact it has on them, but that family too that was affected. And our condolences, I talked to the father. I extended my condolences to their family. It was an unfortunate incident. But the reality is not what we see a lot of times. But that divisiveness is occurring across this country because of rhetoric that's being out there. And I'm not beating up the media all the time because sometimes they do great stories. I'm going to tell you, our local media, that beyond the badge where they highlight our officers doing good things, I thank them for doing that because they understand. We do have a great working relationship. They're trying to showcase the good things we do too. So what effect has the last 2 years of incidences and this last 15 years and everything having on our country and our profession? I'm going to tell you, it's quite divergent from what we saw right after 9/11. Instead of the country being united, we're being divided. I've said that more than once. Applicant pools right now are down in recruitment. I can tell you, I just came back from the Chiefs Conference from this summer and talking to the other chiefs. Families are encouraging their loved ones who are in our law enforcement profession that have enough years to retire. They're telling them, you've done your time, get out, because they're worried about them. They're worried that something's going to happen to them, they're going to be targeted, or worse, they're even going to become the next national media incident. And it can happen to any one of us at any day, at any given hour. On the other end of the spectrum, I've got young officers and other agencies their families are telling them, look, you only got a couple of 3 years into this, you're not invested that much, we'll pay for you to go back to school and do something else. And they're conflicted. They're worried. They're worried about doing their job because of the scrutiny. And the second guessing can hurt and can cause somebody to lose their life. Volunteerism right now is struggling, and ultimately the safety of our communities and the future of law enforcement is being threatened. As the chief of Panama City, I'm going to tell you, I'm proud to live in this county. I'm proud to work in the city that I work in and be part of this community, because the days that followed the Dallas incident, we received such an extreme outpouring of community support. That's what's so great about this area. We are supported by you, the community members. Now, I'm probably going to have all of our officers tested for diabetes because we've had about 2 months of sweet treats and all kinds of stuff showing up for us to eat, and we're probably all going to have to go on a diet before Christmas. But it's just those mementos, the taking the time out, the emails, the thank yous, the thank you for your service and all that, that's what keeps us encouraged. That's what keeps our vigor to come and do this job and keep us focused on what we're here to do. It's that support, and we need it. You know, I ran into a gentleman, and I mentioned oath of office at a Friday Fest one night. I just happened to be down there in uniform, and he said, "Hey, I'm a defender of the Constitution. We need to talk to you about how y'all violate everybody's constitutional rights." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm a defender of the Constitution too." And he said, "What?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "When I swore my oath as a police officer, I said I would defend the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Florida." I said, "I too do that. I believe in that. We have rules. I understand the Fourth Amendment. We can't violate it, but we can get a warrant, and it gives us a prescription to give it, to conduct a search and seizure. So, but we have rules to follow." He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to respond to that. But today, as the towers of our professions are under attack, we need to remember those that 9/11. What did you see when those towers were under fire? You saw first responders running to as other people were running away. Just like Brother George said, no greater love is there than a man laying down a life for his friend. These are people they don't even know. When we go out to that call or we respond to your house or we respond to that incident, it doesn't matter who you are. We're coming because we love you. We care. We care about this community and what goes on in it. And so as that attack is happening today, we need your prayers. We need your encouragement. But most importantly, we need you to unite with us because we need to resolve this divide that's going on in our country. Sure, we've got to be vigilant for those future acts of terror that, like we saw earlier. But what we desperately need as a country, as a state, as a county, as a city, is to unite. So what is it that can unite us as a country, as a city, as a county, as a community? There's only one thing, and that's Almighty God. That's the Lord Jesus Christ. And not just reverence for his omniscience, omnipotence, or omnipresence, but also obedience. Obedience to his word, obedience to his standards, but most importantly to his greatest command, that we love each other. We've got to love each other, folks. We've got to take care of each other. Yes, God is our creator and our master, but we are all we have is each other. We've got to keep each other up. Remember, it's when tragedy strikes that we as Americans are at our best. Thank you.